Um, Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Inkar, and I'm the founder and project lead of this project. I'm very happy to see all of you here today joining us and our four brilliant speakers to have a wonderful afternoon with us for the next 2 hours. First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about this project. We started functioning from last October on, and it's been almost a year since we started our project. You know that we are online on Instagram, on YouTube, and on Facebook. Within a year, we have gained more than 2,500 followers, and we have shared more than 100 pieces of content online. And on YouTube, as you know, we have video interviews with ethnic immigrants from different countries at the different age with different professional backgrounds. With this project, we want to say that our mission is to empower ethnic immigrant youth to better integrate into this society. And at the same time, we want to build understanding among ethnic Kazakhs from different backgrounds. So I hope that you like our work and you have enjoyed reading our posts or watching our video talk shows in the last 1 year. And this is our first ever online event. We have invited 4 brilliant speakers from, I would say, from different parts of the world, because now 2 are actually in Germany, 1 in Turkey, and 1 in Kazakhstan, which is quite diverse. And they're not only ethnic Kazakhs or in Kazakhstan or from abroad, but they're actually those who found this ethnic migration experience very interesting and would like to investigate into it and share their finding with us today. So without further ado, I'll shortly also introduce 4 speakers. The first one is Professor Ishik Kushu, I think. Sure. Kushu, yes. She is from Middle East Technology University, and she is now, she has been studying diaspora and migration for almost all her professional lives. And she has published several articles on Kazakhstan's ethnic migration policy and also Kazakh diaspora in foreign countries, including Turkey, which our project actually has referred to in April when we talk about ethnic Kazakhs all around the world. We are very glad to have her today with us. So I believe, I think we would do the introduction one by one, and then you could start directly showing your presentation, and I will go to the next person with the introduction. Yep. Sure. You have permission, so you could share your screen and start your presentation.
Well, I'm actually didn't prepare because I thought we have only 8 minutes, so I better start. First of all, I would like to congratulate Inkar and this project. I think this is a great initiative, and for those of you who are here, I see mostly young people, and I think it's great that you have interest in these issues, because as a researcher, I have started interested in this issue. It's kind of coincidence. I got my PhD degree in Indiana University in the US, and there we were. I was also learning Kazakh, and we were doing one-on-one reading class with my advisor on Kazakh newspapers, and then I came across this Oralman issue. I mean, at the time they were called Oralman, and it was so interesting. And my research focus, I like when there's people involved. Obviously there are all these people and mostly newspapers were talking about the problems. Obviously that's media's job. And then I decided to work on the issue. So at the time when I conducted my field work, it was 2007 almost a year, I stayed in Kazakhstan and did interviews, mostly elite interviews, but I also did some participant observations, talked to people who are actually қандас themselves. I'm a more political science person, so I looked at more at the public debate in Kazakhstan and due to this migration, because Kazakhstan claims to be a multi-ethnic country, but at the same time, the people are, this privilege of migration, allows the migration of ethnic Kazakhs only. So this kind of looked like an interesting research question. I looked at retrospectively, how this policy is conducted. So the policy part, legislative changes, and I think it's almost 30 years since Kazakhstan started this policy. I think it's easy to highlight the problems, and I'll do some of it too. But I think overall, almost maybe 2 million or 1,700,000 қандас migrated to Kazakhstan, and for a country who is a relatively young nation state with demographic deficit, I think this is a great achievement. Plus, the people who came to Kazakhstan have better preserved their language skills, meaning the mother, I know Kazakhstan, these language issues are tricky too, but at the same time, that also, helps the country to smoothly, without, threatening the other minority groups, feel threatened, smoothly transit to Kazakh-speaking country, more like, and people I see a lot of people out to speaking Kazakh. If they didn't in the past, for some reason, they have the courage to learn it. So I think in all these respects, it's a great contribution for that nation building, And over the time, Kazakhstani leadership kind of switched policies due to problems, because at the end of the day, when there are people, there is corruption, there are slow bureaucracy and these kind of people and problems. And when you look at overall, I was also comparing German and the Israeli examples in my dissertation. Ethnic adaptation, ethnic return migration policies are really not so easy. People think that it will be easier because they can easily fit into the homelands, host societies group, because they're already part of that group. But in reality, it doesn't work like that. And still, it brings a lot of problems. And also, Kazakhstan is an attractive country for labor migrants from Central Asia. So it's kind of like a hub after Russia in the Eurasian migration, system. So for any country, let alone the established ones, and Kazakhstan going through the problems, tough period of the, transition, economic and political transition, I find this policy relatively successful in many ways, but the problems, of course, the adaptation problems, for example, or getting the right skills, job, for jobs, linguistic and professional skills that people can actually use. But again, a lot of the times, like people with, diplomas in where they're coming from, when they see, when they come to this new, even though it's the homeland, they see their diplomas are not really good for anything. And remember this, we had a lot of in Turkey people from Balkans Bulgarian Turks, for example, forcibly migrated, and these people all of a sudden, when they were veterinary, for example, in their country, or physicians, all of a sudden they found themselves doing jobs like has nothing to do with their training, like security guard, etc. So, but over the time, what my observation is, the kandastar, in this case, their generations, the younger generations who are educated in Kazakhstan from early ages, are much better adapting to this environment and are very successful, smart young people. As an example of Ankara, I can tell. So in that regard, it's good. And also the government, they established this Kandastar Koru, I guess, right? And this one was especially a good initiative in terms of, and I think the government just appointed a couple of months ago the former ambassador in Turkey to the head of this Otanına Koru, and he's also very excited. He's a young Abzal Sepepakulu. He's a very, energetic person, and I'm sure there will be also other positive developments in that respect. So I think I'll stop here. So I'll give up my other colleagues time to talk. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ishik, for sharing your observation on especially the positive sides of ethnic migration policy in Kazakhstan, and acknowledging that maybe younger people are really adapting very well to the society nowadays than people have imagined. So thank you very well for giving such a quick overview of your research results. And I would move on to the next speaker. Next speaker is Jania Sazanova. Now she is serving as national consultant at United Nations IOM. And before, she studied at Central European University with her master's thesis actually focused on the hybrid identity of ethnic immigrants, namely Kandastar. At that time, it was called Oralman in Kazakhstan, with very interesting findings. Without further ado, I'd like to give the stage to Jania.
Thank you so much. I will share my screen. Do you see it?
Yes.
Бәріңе сәлем, менің атым Жания Сазанова. Мен осында болуға өте көп қуаныштымын. Шақырғандарыңызға көп рахмет. Енді мен қарсы болмасаңыз, мен ағылшын тілінде жалғастырамын. So hello everyone, my name is Jania Sazanova. Thank you for inviting me here. Thank you, Inkar, for making this project. It is really very successful, and I want to thank you for inviting me. So I'm very excited to be here. So I'll be talking briefly about my thesis work, dissertation of my master's studies at Central European University. I think that we don't have much time, but if I will run out, please tell me. So, yes, 1 second. So firstly, I will talk about the backgrounds of Kazakhstani ethno-national identity and about my thesis work of development hybrid identity among Khandас. And I will talk briefly about findings and outcomes of this study. So firstly, about backgrounds of the nation building in the independent Kazakhstan. No, in 1990, there was a huge demographic loss in 1990s. So as you may know, many Germans and, for example, Polish people, they left our country to their homelands, and there was also heterogeneous ethnic composition at that time. And one of the issues was a linguistic issue because of the bilingualism, and this all created this goal for creating the domestic policies for the revival of the national identification and the so-called sense of belonging of Kazakh people. That's why our government catalyzed the processes of nationalism and created the language policy aimed at strengthening the Kazakh language and also the immigration policy. So this immigration policy, as you may know, it welcomes ethnic Kazakhs from around the world, from diaspora communities, to come and to return to their historic homeland, Kazakhstan. And the goals of this policy include the population growth. Also, in my opinion, it includes the historical justice for the people who immigrated in 1920s and beyond in Soviet times, who immigrated from Kazakhstan to the bordering countries and for the all around the world. And other goals include maintaining national identity and economic contribution to Kazakhstan. So this status of қандас, which was previously called status of оралман, includes like officially many benefits for ethnic migrants, such as social security benefits, administrative and employment benefits, and integration courses. Also in the like official website, electronic government, you can see that for ethnic migrants, there are free like translation services. And I want to say that this policy is really similar to many cases around the world, so it is not very new. For example, in Israel, in Japan, and in China, there are the similar ethnic immigration policies. And in Israel, it was really successful in 20th century. According to the official data, from the start of independence until 2020, more than 1 million of ethnic Kazakhs moved to Kazakhstan. And while these goals of this policy are very clear and deterministic, the processes and implementation of the policy is very complex, because like inclusion into the quota network, acquiring residence permits, and registration for the citizenship are very complex processes. And қандас are given only 1 year officially to accomplish all these legal procedures and to acquire the residence permits and citizenship. And after this year, they are abducted from this status of қандас, and they are abducted from all of these benefits. So I think it is quite complex in nature. And I want to talk like briefly about this official term of for ethnic migrants. So until 2019, it was called like оралман, which translates from Kazakh language as returnee and the one who returns. But it acquired somehow a negative connotation and somehow negative perception from local society and also in the public discourses from the official figures. That's why our current president in 2019 decided to change this like social rhetoric and presented the new term қандас, which translates as the individual of the same blood from Kazakh language. And I think that's one of the reasons to changing the term is to eliminate this social stigma and to give the possibility to like create a new identity for ethnic migrants. And in fact, in my observations, like it is really positively perceived by many ethnic migrants, but the previous term is still widely used by society. So, yes. And talking about my study, I conducted semi-structured, in-depth interviews about economic, social, and psychological aspects of the integration of қандастар to Kazakhstan. And my interview guide included the questions about immigration to Kazakhstan, about internal solidarity among қандас, and about the language, their perception of language and self-identification. But I had some limitations because I had 10 interviews, and maybe the age and the origin of ethnic migrants, my respondents, cannot create the representative sample. But this is a qualitative research. That's why my goal was to obtain some common features among them. So here you can see the list of my respondents. So you can see that for age, like they were young, so from 20 to 25 years old mainly. Only one respondent was older than 55 years old. Mainly they came from China, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and one respondent was from Mongolia. And what is also interesting is that many of my respondents told that their native language is Chinese, and the ones that came from Mongolia and Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, they reported Kazakh language as their native language. So talking about the findings of my study, the goals of the immigration to Kazakhstan for my respondents were mainly homeland orientation, the opportunity to preserve Kazakh language and culture. Also, many of them told that there are good economic factors, such as better conditions for employment and education, but mainly they came for the symbolic goals of ethnic affinity. Also, many of my respondents, they faced institutional challenges. So there were some problems with documentation, and they reported that the services in the Kazakh language were unavailable. And also none of my respondents knew that there should be like free integration courses, there should be like free translation services. So in reality, implementation of this policy might a little bit struggle. And many of my respondents also faced the integration challenges, like some of them faced some linguistic discrimination based on the bilingualism of our country and some level of bureaucracy and corruption while making the documents. This all created these difficulties with adaptation for them. And what is also interesting for me is that for their self-identification, language was very central. So their lack of integration into society was based on the linguistic issues mainly. And that's why some of them were labeled from the local society and kind of stigmatized. All of this created this differentiation between us and them, because some of my respondents also told that they expected, when they came to Kazakhstan, they expected to share the similar understanding of the Kazakh culture, of the Kazakh language, but in reality, it was some kind of difference. That's why they alienated from the local society somehow. And what I also noticed is that the higher was the level of internal integration between Kandastar, the higher was the level of alienation from the local society. And this all created the identity dilemma for them. So some of them also had this internalized prejudice. So even if they didn't face any discrimination or labeling, they had this internalized prejudice based on this cultural hybridity and differences with the locals. So all of this created this like unstable entity of in-between worlds. So one of my respondents told that I don't belong like with the locals, but I also don't belong in my country of origin. So I think this is really important to notice this like identity dilemma and to research it. So in conclusion, I just want to say that in my observations, ethnic migrants face difficulties not only on institutional level of this policy, but also on the societal level. So thank you for listening to me. In case of any questions, I don't think that we have time now, but you can see my email contacts, and if you want, you can just comment and share any questions with me.
Thank you, Zhenya. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation and for your findings. I believe you touched upon some of the overlooked issues, or probably some issues that people don't really pay attention to in our society. So thank you for sharing your results with us. Actually, Zhenya's topic is a bit relevant to the topic of the next speaker, who is Elizabeth Woods. Ellie actually is going to complete her master's degree in social and cultural anthropology in the University of Tübingen. This is her second master's degree, which now she is focusing on actually the ideas of homeland for Khandas people. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Ellie to the stage.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for coming out today. It's great to see so many different people. I'm just going to share my screen now.
Yeah, Zhenya.
Yeah. Is it okay?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, we can see.
Awesome. Yeah, if I go over time, just jump in and let me know, please. So, all right. So today I'll be discussing a much more summarized version of my master's thesis, like Inkar said. And like she said, I'm focusing on how young ethnic Kazakh migrants, how they understand the homeland. What does homeland mean to them? And the title of my thesis is The Borders of Home, Questions of Homeland Among Kazakhstan's Young Returnees. So I want to first begin with a question. So what is a homeland? I think for a lot of people, the country of one's birth is their homeland. Or maybe it's a specific state or city or a region. Maybe for people like Americans or Canadians, their homeland is the place from which their ancestors once came. Or maybe it's a place that you still feel like you have to find for yourself. Or maybe this word means nothing at all to you and it's just an empty container. But what I think is interesting about the word homeland is there's this variety of different definitions for it. It's not something which is static and immutable, but rather something that is fluid. So something that can be different for each person, something that is negotiated and renegotiated, depending upon where we feel that we belong and don't belong at the time. And I think this question of homeland is really interesting in the context of migration. So how do migrants negotiate the borders of their homelands? How do they understand homeland after traversing nations, cultures, and communities? And I think this is even more confusing for so-called return migrants. So is their homeland the place that they were born in? Or is it the place that they migrate to that they're supposed to have all of these, ethnic and historical ties to? How do they kind of conceptualize that? And this question I kind of studied in my last master's degree. But this is what made me interested in the case of ethnic Kazakh return migrants as well. Yeah, so my research question, again, I'm making this a little summarized since we don't have much time. But I'm, like I said, interested in how young Kazakh migrants understand the idea of a homeland after living both in two places. So is it their country of origin, Kazakhstan, or somewhere in between, or is it something entirely different? So more specifically, I'm interested in how factors such as relationships and family dynamics, memories, myths of return, language, discrimination, aspirations, how these factors all play a role in shaping these migrants' attachments to their country of birth and to Kazakhstan. And then taking it one step further, how these attachments create an idea or a sense of homeland. So for the sake of time today, I'm just going to be focusing on discussing some homeland trends, which I discovered during the course of my research. So I'll talk about my methodology really quick. So COVID kind of changed every plan that I had for my research. I originally wanted to go to Kazakhstan for 6 months, take a Kazakh language course, and spend time both in rural and urban areas. But yeah, because of COVID, I had to kind of change everything up. So I split my research into 2 separate phases, I guess you could call it. So the first phase, which was from October 2021 to March 2022, I did life history interviews via Zoom, Telegram, and Instagram. Then for phase 2, during April of 2022, I did life history interviews in Astana and Almaty. And I was in the country for the whole month. So all the interviews that I conducted were with young ethnic Kazakh return migrants from 18 to 30, who were from Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, China, Russia, Turkmenistan, and Iran. And I did these interviews in Kazakhstan's major cities. So the in-person interviews, like I said, were in Astana and Almaty, but I also had some respondents from Aktau, Aktobe, which I conducted over the internet. So yeah, I'm just going to jump in now to these 5 homeland patterns that I found. So I noticed when discussing the idea of homeland with these young migrants that there were 5 kind of types of homelands, or 5 kind of destinations for homelands that I noticed. And while I don't want to just categorize these individuals' experience, because what's really important to me is looking at the kind of variety and diversity of experiences, I do think this is a useful way to map out how people's attachments to place or a lack of attachments to a place can inform their idea of where their home is. So these 5 patterns I'll be discussing with you are no homeland, lost homeland, 1 or 2 homelands, and then deterritorialized homeland. So yeah, pattern 1 is no homeland. And the young migrants I spoke to who fit this type didn't consider themselves to have any homeland at all. So in some cases, this was because the concept just wasn't important for them. They weren't really interested in, like delineating the place where they belonged. It just wasn't important for them. But also in some instances, they thought of homeland as something which they didn't have at the time, but something that they wished to go out and find in the future. What I really think is interesting here is there's kind of an element of choice or of creation. And while I don't have time to go into it today, I think it's interesting to look at how privilege kind of intersects with this. So the privilege to decide where you belong, to go out and find a place that you think is comfortable for you. I think a lot of people don't have this privilege. So that's something interesting to look at with this type. But on the other side of the coin, a lot of people who fit into this type, they often faced extreme difficulties during their migration journey from their country of birth to Kazakhstan. And as a result, they didn't consider themselves to have a homeland at all. So not the place they were born, not Kazakhstan. They just felt like they didn't have a place where they belonged at all. And this type kind of plays into the last one, but this is lost homeland. So due to an inability to return or maintain connections to their country of origin, those within this type feel that they have lost a homeland which they once had. So I noticed this a lot when speaking with migrants from China and Turkmenistan, especially, where the domestic political situation, it left them unable to return kind of indefinitely without risking their personal safety or that of their family or friends, or the visa situation wouldn't allow them to return at all. And because these people that I spoke to, they felt so attached to this place that they had to leave, they often had less of an interest integrating within Kazakhstan. And as a result, they kind of think of homeland as something which is in the past, something which is kind of inaccessible and they can't really return to. And the next is just one homeland. So I, of course, found that many migrants also felt a strong sense of connection only with one place, usually just their country of origin or to Kazakhstan. And it makes sense, but I found that a large part of them being able to make such a connection had to do with the strong place attachments that they had to one of these places. So for example, they had a strong connection with, let's say, their family in China, or the memories they had in China, for example, or the friends that they made in Kazakhstan. I think these things really influence people into deciding where home is for them. And another thing, which I don't have a ton of time to go into, but what I also think is interesting, is that when I spoke with a lot of ethnic Kazakhs from China, and I talked about homeland with them, they told me that they don't feel like Kazakhstan is their homeland necessarily, because their families had lived in the same region for generations and generations. So it was the borders that kind of moved around them. It wasn't them moving away from Kazakhstan. So I also think this is an interesting point as well. So they consider China to be their homeland because of this. Yeah, and then the fourth pattern is two homelands. And this is something which I think has been touched on by a lot of researchers who have done work with this community kind of in the past. This idea of kind of a hybrid identity of belonging to both the country of origin and to Kazakhstan at the same time. And I think something that past researchers have noticed, and I've noticed as well, is a lot of migrants who face difficulties integrating within the country initially, they often feel that their homeland is somewhere both between and within these two places, for example. So they have kind of a mix of attachments between these two places, which I find interesting. Yeah, and then the fifth pattern, I know this sounds a little theoretical and strange, but this idea of a deterritorialized homeland. So actually a big number of the migrants I spoke to, they thought of their homeland in a very sort of abstract sense. So they didn't even necessarily consider their homeland to be a nation state, but instead they saw their homeland in people, especially in their parents or their close relatives. I know a couple of people who I spoke to in Kazakhstan, they said they felt that they belonged in Kazakhstan and they really loved Kazakhstan, but it couldn't be home for them until their parents moved there as well. So it's the people that really makes the place, if that makes sense. So yeah, I thought that was interesting as well. And yeah, my aim in outlining these different paths, like I said, is not to just, categorize people's experiences and kind of limit them to these different types, but I'm really interested in how these attachments to place affect the creation of these homelands. And this is what I'll go into in my thesis in more detail, kind of mapping out these attachments and these different types. But I think it's really important, for example, when we're talking about creating policies that will help migrants integrate, or creating policies that will give migrants a more comfortable and fluid experience in the place that they're migrating to. I think it's really important to look at how discrimination and marginalization, how it affects somebody's ability to call a place home, or how does the language one speaks affect their ability to be connected to a place? What about their relationships with family or friends, or their ability to revisit the place in which they were born? And yeah, as I wrote here, I think it's really essential when you're looking to make inclusive policies and look for a more integrated future, both for these migrants and for the receiving societies in Kazakhstan. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to contact me on Twitter or email. Yeah, I'll look forward to it. Thank you very much. And I also just wanted to say briefly a really big thank you to IS Project, because when I was starting out with my research and I was totally online, it was very difficult for an American girl to just kind of jump into this this community. And yeah, IS Project helped me out a ton, and I've really learned a lot from them. So yeah, thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Ellie. Appreciate it too, and thank you for bringing up this topic. I think it's quite vital, because until now we have only learned most of the cases one narrative of historical homeland, when Kazakhstan actually calls all the migrants back to the country. But today we see 5 different types, which is very interesting. Thank you for the results. And I think the next speakers would also be speaking a very relevant topic, also about a lot of single narratives, but it may not be the case. So I would like to introduce Toljan. Toljan received her master's degrees in Eurasian Studies from Nazarbayev University, and now she is pursuing her PhD in Frankfurt. She actually investigated into the overall experience of return migrants, which will be very interesting to know. So without further ado, I'd like to give the stage to Toljan.
Hello to everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present here. Бәріңізге сәлем. Айтам, осы IS Project'ның презентациясына келгеніме өте қуаныштымын. Енді осы презентациямды ағылшын тілде өткізетін боламын. I'm going to talk about the transnational practices of Kazakh repatriates coming from China, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, and Russia. And this presentation actually is based on my master's thesis, which I defended last year. Because of the outbreak of COVID and the strict lockdowns in Kazakhstan in summer 2020, I had to conduct online interviews instead of face-to-face interviews. And in total, I conducted 20 interviews. My research participants were recruited from ads on Contact and Telegram, also posts in new social media groups. And I also used snowballing sampling when participants were asked to suggest other potential participants whom they know. And the age range of participants is 18 to 50, but half of the participants can be considered as a youth group of 18 to 30 years old. As the time given for this presentation is limited, I would like to focus and give a brief summary of the main findings of one of the chapters in my thesis. So when in this presentation, I argue that the engagement of Kazakh returnees in transnational activities helps them to cope with disappointment about unmet expectations of homecoming and feelings of not belonging to Kazakhstan. So when I say feelings of disappointment about homecoming, what do I mean by this? Oh, sorry. Here I'm raising the concepts of imagined and real homelands when my participants had expectations before moving and settling in Kazakhstan, but their expectations actually were not met because of the various reasons. And the most common reasons were economic insecurity, because some of them, my participants and their parents, they had degrees in their host countries, but these degrees are not equal and not working in Kazakhstan, and because of this they had some struggles with finding a work in Kazakhstan. Also culture. What was the most interesting is that young people, young Kandastar, they shared their ideas of finding the right partner, like romantic partner and spouses, and they didn't know whom to approach. Like either they will look to for Chinese Kazakhs, for example, or they will look to Kazakhstani Kazakhs. And here, also because of their identities, which they struggle to identify themselves, and they have a feelings of being uprooted. They had some problems with the cultural side of the adaptation in Kazakhstan. Language is also one of the most important points here, because the highly Russification of Kazakh society also was one of the crucial problems of Kazakhs from China, Mongolia. Locals' attitude is not good for all of the Kandastar, because they shared with me, like once people in Kazakhstan know that they're coming from China or Uzbekistan, they start to call them Chinese or like Uzbek, and this really gave them like more confusion about where is like their homeland, where is their society. And also some of my research respondents, mostly those who are older than 25, they also met a lot of corruption cases in Kazakhstan. So by all of this, I mean that these feelings of disappointment about homecoming, and they struggled with, and the transnational activities could help them to adjust, to feel support. And this is important not only in the case of returnees or refugees, but all of the people. I think it's the social connectedness, the feeling that you are not alone is very important. And by the time of their post-return life in Kazakhstan, mostly it is their host society, by which I mean China, Uzbekistan, Mongolia, or Russia. They was able to provide them this feeling of being not alone, of feeling of connectedness, and this helped them with having a good well-being and adaptation in Kazakhstan. Transnationalism is highly discussed in literature, and long-standing cross-border activities always existed. However, literature indicates that migrants' attachment to the home country and transnational ties weakens after their migration. However, ethnic return migrants are an example of migrants whose ties with the country of origin don't weaken over time residing in the receiving country. So what do we mean by transnationalism? Transnational activities, a lot of definitions given by the researchers in the literature, but if I will summarize them, I would say that it is some long-standing social links in communication with the host society, and during my fieldwork, one of the main forms of such activities were visitings to friends and family in host society, but also when their families and friends come to Kazakhstan, they also host them in the country, and they also do internet communication, because technologies nowadays are very developed. They can maintain connection every day. Also, remittances is one of the common factors and activities of my participants. A lot of them, especially youth, қандастар, they got financial help from their parents, and those who are a bit older, they send help to their parents and relatives in China, Russia, Uzbekistan, and Mongolia. Also, parcels, sending and receiving parcels is a common thing between Kandastar from Uzbekistan and Mongolia. And business suppliers, like a relationship with the business suppliers in the host countries, is also one of the interesting things which my participants shared with me. For example, my participant Dara, she's from Russia, and she came to Kazakhstan in 2010. She currently in her 30s. She opened her cafe in Astana city, and for her cafe, she decided to buy meat from Russia instead of Kazakhstan. She has relatives who have a livestock business there, and she also considers that cattle which was grown in Russia has much more natural environment and good feed, and the price is actually a bit lesser than in Astana. So she decided to to use help from her relatives and use it in her own business. Another form of transnational activities is the political activities, because I have a lot of respondents from China, and all of them are worried with the current situation there. China's regime against Muslim ethnic minorities, and this actually prevents a lot of my Chinese respondents, respondents from China, to contact their relatives there, and they struggled with finding a way to communicate with them. For example, Aqljan, he is very young. He came to Kazakhstan. He came to Kazakhstan as a kind of the first person in his current family to get an education here, and his father sent him to test Kazakhstan if it is if it will be good to the whole family to move here. But after he came to Kazakhstan, this situation with the the situation of China's regime was very much kind of increased, and for 1.5 or 2 years he couldn't contact any of his relatives in China, and he had a really kind of sad times of being alone, of feeling that he is not belong to Kazakhstan, but he also cannot get any support from his parents because they also refuse to contact him. Otherwise, the Chinese government, as he was told, will identify where he is and maybe like start some investigation on him, like in general in this situation with all other people who are in Kazakhstan. However, during this COVID-19 situations, my respondents from China, they was really disadvantaged, but others from Uzbekistan, Russia, and Mongolia, they could contact their relatives every day because of the technologies, because of the internet, and so on. However, after the COVID-19, some of them decided to bring their parents to Kazakhstan because they really was worried about the situation, about their relatives. And for example, Dara from Russia, she was not able to attend her brother's funeral, and she says that it was the most hard time for her and her family, and the fact that their family are not able to see how their granddaughter is raising also kind of increased anxiety in her life. So as of now, she already moved her parents to Kazakhstan. Here I would like to show you some excerpts from my interviews, which shows how my respondents had a feeling of being not belong to their ethnic homeland, Kazakhstan. And why do they look for their transnational ties more like intensively? For example, Aru from China, she says that I don't perceive myself as a local in Kazakhstan. I see the division. For instance, sometimes locals call me Dungan if I share that I am from China. They highlight that they knew it as it is obvious. Well, I try to be local, but I don't feel like a local here. I was looking for Chinese Kazakhs to become friends in Kazakhstan. Also, she shared with me that her kind of schoolmates and university mates, they ask her some questions like, do you eat insects? How do you know Kazakh language? Who did learn it? Like, where did you learn it? And for example, Kunike from also China, she says that some local people hate Chinese people. For example, when I'm in China, I'm different. And when I'm in Kazakhstan, I'm also different. I don't know where I belong. This is a question now for me. To cope with this feeling, after my arrival to Kazakhstan, several years, I traveled 4 times in a year to China to my friends and family members there. However, as of now, all of my respondents say that they want to stay in Kazakhstan. They are not planning to leave their homeland country, and all their transnational ties help them to cope with their negative feelings, negative feelings of being not belonging to Kazakhstan. However, this support and social connectedness helps them to adjust, and currently they feel that they can continue their life and their plans in Kazakhstan. They see their future in their ethnic homeland. With this, I want to continue my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tokjan, for sharing this coping mechanism of how to deal with different types of challenges for Khandas. This is very interesting for me because different economic, social, and political transnational activities actually are not considered as barrier, but sometimes how they deal with the challenges. So thank you very much. I believe Ishik has to leave because of
the reason for maybe I can just say a little bit what I wrote you as a message.
Mom, show that. Mom, show. No.
So I think all my colleagues, this is great. All of your each single research is very, very interesting. I see that this new generation scholars are now building more on what we had earlier. I think that's great, and congratulations on that. And for Inkar and for this organization, and this is a great this is a very great event, and I hope you guys will have more, and I'll be happy to help in my capacity in the future as well. now I have to leave because, you know, I couldn't find a babysitter for my younger boy. So sorry. And good luck with everything.
Thank you, Ishik, for explaining the reason. We would like to have you next time. Thank you for joining us. Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So now I'd like to move on to the panel discussion. So for now, we have 3 speakers. I just want to ask some questions that have bothered me as a homecoming, as an immigrant here, or my audience throughout this year. We received so many questions, or some researchers who have asked some questions. So I'd like to first start from overall that you have done a lot of literature review, you have done interviews, you have looked into probably the ethnic migration cases in other countries. So as it was mentioned, in Japan, in China, in Israel, there are similar practices. So I want to ask Toljan, Eli, or Zhenya, any of you would like to answer that. What do you think Kazakhstan stands out here with its ethnic migration policy? And what do you think are the disadvantages, or how, like, the shortcomings of its current ethnic migration policy in comparison to other countries? Sure, Ellie.
Yeah, maybe I can just say something. I'm not, as you can see from my presentation, I'm not super focused on policy, but just from what I've noticed, I studied ethnic Russians in the past who were living in other countries at the time that the Soviet Union fell. So they were living in Estonia. That's the people that I studied. And I also studied the ones who moved back to Russia as well. But what's interesting to me about Kazakhstan is that so much of the country's nation building efforts were kind of focused on bringing in ethnic Kazakhs into the country. They were seen, from my understanding, as part of sort of building up the nation. And to me, that's really unique. And I find that really, really interesting. And I think in the beginning, Kazakhstan put in place a lot of good policies to kind of drive in migrants and to give them opportunities, kind of set them up for success in Kazakhstan. But from what I've seen, I think what's lacking is more of efforts being put into social integration, and especially in terms of language as well. Because what I found, especially, you know, talking with young ethnic return migrants, is the biggest barrier for them is just language. And it's really difficult for them because, you know, the majority of them speak Kazakh, but no Russian. And even if there are people around them who speak both languages, they will still prefer to speak Russian most often. So I think that's kind of what's lacking, in my opinion, is more kind of policies and initiatives towards that kind of social integration as well. So.
Thank you, Ellie. Yes, Shania.
Thank you, Ellie. I totally support your arguments, and I really agree with these points of view. And I just wanted to add that about the linguistic policies of our country, like it is different from other policies, like in Israel and Japan and maybe China, in this realm that like our country has this like problem, not only for ethnic migrants, but like overall, our nation building processes are very relying on the linguistic issues. And because of this bilingualism, I think that in 1990s it was harsher, but now like young people and young community and societies, they are more prone to learn Kazakh and to speak in it. So I think that it's like we need some time to build this like strong language policy, and it will affect and influence the problems of ethnic migrants. I believe in it. And yeah, so I think that this is what differentiates us from other like cases of similar policies.
Thank you, Zhenya. Torzhan, do you want to add something? Or I could go with the next question.
Yeah, please go with the next question.
Sure. So now, just now we talked about different nations, different countries with migrant policy. Now I want to talk more about the different age groups. So I know that while you were conducting your interviews with researchers, oh, can you hear me?
You froze during your question. I'm not sure if it's the same for everybody else or
maybe there are some connection problems.
Yeah, I think it's the connection problems. Now can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, I think I would turn off my camera for a while, but I'm going to ask the next question. Now I believe you can hear me well, right? So my next question is that just now we have focused on different countries with the similar practices. Now I'd like to talk about different age groups. So I know that while you were conducting interviews with Khandas or ethnic immigrants from different countries, you have interviewees or respondents from different age groups. While this project is, as you know, primarily focusing on the youth groups, I want to hear about your opinions on your observation of these groups, namely the Khandas probably below 30 years of age. How are they different from the other age groups, probably? Yes, Shania?
I just want to tell from my experience, like my respondents were mainly from 20 to 25 in the age, and only one of my respondents was like older. And from this perspective, it might not be representative, but what I noticed is that like older generations, they are more prone to be like to preserve the traditions and to preserve the culture. So they are more prone to have this like Kazakh culture. And for young communities, it is also like that, but I didn't notice this kind of differentiation. So I think that for older generation is what I noticed is that they didn't share this Soviet past, and they were like dissociating themselves from this Soviet past and Soviet culture, while younger generations, they might not know much about it. That's why they were not talking about this. So this is what I noticed, and like this might be not very representative.
Yes, thank you, Zhenya. Can we hear from the other speakers as well? Yes, Torzhan.
I agree with Zhenya and Eli in terms of the language and that they kind of more far from the Soviet past and they can maybe adjust better, adapt better in Kazakhstan if they know language well. But one thing which my respondents also share, young respondents, that they feel more insecure. They feel like when they meet this stigmatization of being oral man and like being Chinese Kazakh or Uzbekistani Kazakh, they actually have a feeling of like either to hide their backgrounds. For example, one of my respondents shared that he's from Uzbekistan, but she moved to Kazakhstan during his I think eighth grade school, and he actually had to hide his the country of his birth because he met a lot of stigmatization towards other people and himself. And he moved to another school, a good school, and then he continued to hide his country birth. And this was really, really sad for me. And I feel like that this stigmatization should be gone. Work, like governments and our society have to work on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tokjan, for sharing your perspectives on the, how to say, insecurity of the youth group. Ellie, do you want to add something? Because I know you primarily actually focused on youth group, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Let me think. I think what I noticed the most was kind of a difference between the older generation and the newer generation. And I think what's difficult for me, at least, is that in the research that considers the older generation, it's kind of limited in its focus. So it's difficult for me to say, like, if this isn't true of the older generation as well, but just based on what researchers used to focus on in the past, at least. I feel like the newer generation is a bit more mobile in terms of looking at where their homeland is. I think they feel like they have more options, maybe because of globalization, you know, all the buzzwords, stuff like that. But I think it does actually really make a difference when people are looking at, you know, where they want to go, where they feel like they belong. So I would say that's a difference. Something that was really surprising for me as well was how many young migrants I spoke to who moved by themselves for school. And this was a group that I didn't even consider when I started my research, because there were really no, there were no projects done on this group. So when I came to Kazakhstan, I started meeting all of these young people who moved primarily for school, which I thought was interesting. And also something that Zhenya said was really interesting to me, and this isn't just true of return migrants, but it's something I noticed of young Kazakhstanis, is that I feel there's a really, like she said, a renewed interest in Kazakh identity and Kazakh language. And something else I thought was interesting was there seems to be kind of a moving away from Russian. And I feel young people are growing more interested in English instead, which is interesting to me. I've seen a lot of stuff on social media from young Kazakhstanis who, you know, they say, well, English isn't our colonial language. So I feel more comfortable using English because it was never imposed on me, which I thought was really interesting. And I do wonder if this will go on to kind of shape interactions, you know, between Kazakhstanis and then ethnic Kazakhs who move in, because the vast majority of the people that I spoke to spoke English really well. Like they spoke English almost perfectly, it was really interesting to see, you know, that I could communicate with people from Mongolia, Iran, for example. So yeah, I think those would be the main differences that I noticed.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. It's also very interesting to know. And you have all mentioned about the nation building process of Kazakhstan. And you mentioned that we're still a very young country. It still takes some time for us to build the nation we want. So my next question would be relevant to this. I just want to focus on the Khandas roles. Because as you know, ethnic migration policy in Kazakhstan actually ensures the rights of Khandas to be equal to the citizens of Kazakhstan. Also, they have some obligations too. So this means that they could contribute to the country even if they are immigrants. So here I want to ask about your opinion on, after all this research you have done, what do you think that Khandas could contribute, especially we still could mostly focus on the youth, even if there are a lot of challenges that involved right now. Yes, Zhenya, feel free.
I think that the main contribution would be economic one. So like every migrants in each community, they contribute economically firstly. And also, in my opinion, the contribution, like the real contribution that could influence our society could be their they could share their perception of culture, of their understanding of nation, of of Kazakh ethnicity. So I think that by sharing this attitude towards our self-identification and by sharing their ideas on our culture, they firstly they will integrate into our society, and also the locals could acknowledge many of the how to say, many of the cultural not differences, but what can we make what can we make as a Kazakh culture as a whole. So we can add all of these experiences of the culture and make this as a one. So I think that there is no need to distinct the to make it heterogeneous. I think that the Kazakh culture should be homogeneous, and it should be built upon experiences of all, of ethnic migrants, of local Kazakhs, and I think this would be the great contribution.
Thank you. Thank you. Toljan, would you like to add on something? Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to add that this question of contributing to their homeland is very interesting, and I think it's special to Kandastar because a lot of my respondents, they say that they actually wanted to move to Kazakhstan in order to service their ethnic homeland, and this was very fascinating for me, because I don't know, when you move to another country, you use people, what do they think first? Maybe first that they can gain something, they can earn money, but it is very rarely when you hear that you want to contribute to the country, you want to service. Yes, and also I think that government actually can do make great benefit of our young and all age group of Kazakhs moving to Kazakhstan, and use it to build to advantage our ethnic identity and national identity, because it's a lot of numbers now, more than 1 million, and if they will make some kind of a campaign, and this will also educate local people on who is actually Khandas, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Toljan. Thank you for pointing that out too. I think I would move on to the next question. So you all mentioned, when we talk about ethnic immigrants or ethnic migration here overall, what we could hear one word usually is integration. So now, after working on this project for a year, a lot of people started asking me the question, what is the integration here in Kazakhstan? What is the integration of Khandas in Kazakh society? Because it's also written in our mission statement of the project, is that we want to empower Khandas youth to integrate better into the society. But we found out that there is no clear success criteria for integration. So for example, especially because Kazakhstan is still undergoing a nation building process, it is that when we require Khandas people to do something, probably local people who are born and raised here are not doing it themselves. So it means it's very hard to interpret this integration here in Kazakhstan for Khandas. Do you have any answers for these questions? What does it mean for Khandas to integrate into society, into Kazakh society? Yes, Ellie.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a big question. I think in any kind of context, what integration really is. But my first thought when it comes to integration is the ability for immigrants or migrants to move to a place and feel like they belong irrespective of their differences. So they move to a place and they don't lose the things that are different about them. They don't lose, sight of where they came from, their ability to use their language, that sort of thing, but they're kind of accepted. And I think based off of what I've spoken with my respondents, I think a lot of them don't feel this kind of acceptance, especially, like I said, in terms of like language, a lot of the stereotypes that are put onto ethnic migrants. And I think if these kind of barriers were eliminated, then maybe that could be said to be successful integration. Something that I find really interesting as well is that my respondents who come from CIS countries, such as like Uzbekistan, for example, they spoke of their process of migrating to Kazakhstan as being a really simple one for them. They just moved to another country. They didn't need to learn another language or face these stereotypes. They just kind of blended in. Not that it wasn't difficult for them, it's not that, but it was much more of a fluid process for them. So they couldn't exactly pinpoint a time when they felt integrated because they had always kind of felt a sense of belonging, you know what I mean? And then the people I spoke with from Mongolia and China especially, I noticed that this wasn't the case for them because for the most part, as soon as they come to the country, they're kind of faced with these stereotypes, with these linguistic barriers, that sort of thing. And yeah, it's kind of a big question, but I think it might be interesting to look at the experiences of people who have had more of a fluid process and see how that can be applied to people who come from places that differ more from Kazakhstan culturally, for example. So.
Thank you, Ali, for putting this up. Shania, do you want to answer these questions? Too tough one.
Yes, this is a really complex question, but it is really interesting one. And I think I agree with Ellie. And I think that there can be two kinds of integration. So first is economic integration and like administrative one. So it is when the ethnic migrants receives all of his or her documents like residence permit, getting the citizenship. So I think this like getting the citizenship would be the like economic integration into society, and there is a social integration on the other hand. And the social integration is quite like more complex and it is harder to socially integrate for some of the ethnic migrants. So I think for the like there are no exact criteria for the successful social integration, but I would say that one of the most important is the sense of belonging. So when the ethnic migrants like feels completely like as the local, not as a local, but completely belonging to our country, and without any like stereotypes, biases, and stigmatization fulfills on him or her. I think this is one of the like successful criteria for social integration. But I also think this is a really interesting question for further research. So I think that new scholars who will research this question, they will find out much more factors for this successful integration. So thank you.
Thank you, Zhenya. I also want to hear about the opinions of Togjan on what is a successful integration for Khandas.
Yeah, I will also say that it's very, very complex question. And but for example, if we will look from the perspective of just being a migrant in a new country, and this the first important factors which was already raised by Zhenya, it's this economic, administrative integration and so on. But like my opinion is the same, is it really mostly depends on the feeling of belonging. When you will feel that people in this society do not alienate you, don't other you, then you feel like you are belong to this community. So I think this is the most important. Thank you. I hope that I answered.
Yeah. Thank you, Tokshan. I think, I mean, I understand this is a big question, and until now, there is no research actually focused on this integration problems. What is the definition of integration for the migrants? I think in most of the documents, what we heard is that integration actually is counts on the two-side efforts. It's not only about the migrants themselves, it's also about the receiving society. Their response actually mattered more than the immigrants themselves. But what we are really interested in is in Kazakhstan case, if it still holds true for them. Yeah, so that might be a very great questions for further research, as you have mentioned. And I think my panel discussion with you would be coming to an end here, because I already saw some of the audience has been raising her hand for a long time. So I want to give the chance for them to speak up their questions. So I think Nurgul, we can't wait for your questions here.
Сәлеметсіздер ме? Бірінші іңкәр, мен сізге үлкен ризашылығымды білдіремін, осылай әлеуметтік мәселені көтеріп ғылыми көзқарас қалыптастырып жатқаныңызға. Бірақ енді бұл сіз осы бір конференцияны бастағанда мен кішкене бір мәліметті түсіне қойған жоқпын. Яғни менің білгім келген себебі сізге арнайы сұрақ осы is I would like to know what is the is project initiation. I didn't know about that one. Could you please elaborate more on that? And I have also other questions for other participants.
Okay, I think I would answer. So you want to know why we started this project, right? Yeah, okay. I could briefly talk about the, how to say, behind the scenes story of this project. So the thing here is that it's been 30 years since the independence of Kazakhstan. Actually, 30 years, we have seen more than 1 million khandas moving here. But what we see from most of the media accounts is really the success story of khandas, older generation, how they are contributing to Kazakh society as a whole. But like a lot of under the surface issue was not mentioned. But if you look into the social media, it's very different the case. Like people can speak their mind, can say negative things for the khandas overall online. So we're seeing a very different narratives here. And what we don't really focus on is the youth problems. So they're actually experiencing very different migration stories than those who move probably after 30 years of age. In the school case, they came here at school age. They need to adapt to a new educational system. They need to cope with a lot of challenges that probably, how to say, older generations would face, but we need to take into consideration that they are still very young, that they probably cannot cope with these problems, and there is not so much extra help or support for them that they could find in the school or in their family in some cases. So we want to bring up this youth issues, and we want the society look into their voices, to be honest, with this. And especially one big issue is that we were talking about economic integration, but for the khandas youth, that's still a big problem is that they don't know where to go next in this country, especially professionally. Like when they choose their, for example, university major, it's very hard for them to imagine themselves in the fields they want to work on, because they find out that there are some difficulties here, language barrier, or they don't see people who are like them. That's also causing them fear to enter professional field and a lot of questions. And another thing is that they have a narrow social networks than the local people probably. So when they want to choose to study something, they find out that they could just think of several, but there are so many out there, so many opportunities out there, but they cannot approach them. So overall, we just want қандас to feel comfortable, to feel belong, and also to be able to pursue the opportunities they have in these countries, instead of, I know when they face discrimination or stigma, a lot of cases is that youth would turn back and feel hurt themselves inside. But with this platform, we just want them to know that they still could stand up and could cope with the challenges and could still be themselves and create their own path. Yani өздерінің іздерін өздері жасай алатынына осындай сенімділік орнатқымыз келеді.
Яғни сіздің институтыңыз NGO сияқты да? Сонда институт қой жаңағы көмек беретін. Мен соны түсіндім да.
Иә, бізде негізінен NGO деп қарастырмаймыз. Біз тек қана әлеуметтік жоба, өзінің бір былайша айтқанда уақыты болады. Осыдан кейін жұмысымызды тоқтататын шығармыз деген сияқты, немесе басқа форматта жұмысымызды жалғасамыз.
Yeah, түсінікті болды. Sorry, I just wanted to have some prerequisite knowledge about this organization, I mean, this project, and therefore I addressed myself to Inkar. So I would like to introduce myself. My name is Nurgul Tirlipaeva. I'm a PhD student at Nazarbayev University, and now I'm focusing on the returnees. More specifically, I'm focusing on the educational aspects of returnees who come from China. And this project, I accidentally knew about this project yesterday, and I was like shocked in a positive sense, and because it is something that I can build network, and I'm very happy to see you all. And my question for the speakers is that I know that your focus was not to cover, I mean, during the research educational aspects, but during your interview, did you accidentally find out some educational aspects that could help them integrate into the society in Kazakhstan? I mean, did they somehow touch upon some educational aspects? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Could I finish my speech, or have I been frozen?
I believe you were asking about the educational aspects of the қандас that they probably have encountered, right?
Yeah. Somehow accidentally touched upon the educational aspects.
Yes, Ellie? Yeah. Or Torjan? Yeah. Feel free.
Okay, maybe I'll go first really quick. Since I mostly talked with younger people, most of them moved during their teenage years, so I did touch on education quite a bit. Let me think. I think one thing that was very universal for all of the people I spoke to is that when they moved to Kazakhstan, they had a good working knowledge of how to speak Kazakh to people, but often they didn't know the Kazakh alphabet, for example, or they weren't really well versed in like reading and writing Kazakh because they were mostly speaking it with their parents at home, for example. So this was maybe not, it was just another thing they had to learn in addition to Russian also. I think that's the biggest thing for a lot of the the people that I spoke to when they moved over as kids is that Russian was such a big part of their education as a younger person. But I think what's interesting is that when it comes to university education, a lot of people who moved like from China, for example, they didn't have such difficulties linguistically because, for example, Nazarbayev University is taught in English, if I'm not mistaken, right? And in China, I think there was more of a focus on English. I think almost everybody that I spoke to who comes from China had taken English classes for a while. So it was kind of nice for them, for a lot of the people I spoke to be able to go over to university and already have that kind of comfortability. So yeah, those were just my observations.
Thank you, Ali. Tulja, you want to add up?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I wanted to add that mostly my participants who migrated to Kazakhstan, their parents or they themselves wanted to have an education in Kazakhstan, and they had various reasons. For example, participants from China said that China is really competitive, and this environment of being always in a competition and studying from early morning till the evening was very hard for their psychological well-being and in general physical well-being. So some of them moved to Kazakhstan because of this reason. Others from Uzbekistan and from Mongolia, they moved mostly because they had not an opportunity to study in Kazakh in their host countries. About the education right in Kazakhstan, Russian language was the most the highest struggle of them. However, like the education, I think we didn't cover it a lot, but I think that they are quite good in the education in Kazakhstan. The only problem is the attitude of the peers towards the oral man or қандас.
Yes, thank you for the question, Nurgul. Do we have any more questions from the audience side? Because when we did the registration form, there are also some good questions coming up. So I would like to address some of them too, if you allow me. So one question I think that was raised by most of the participants registered or during our project is that people are questioning where is the best place for қандас to move. Is there any specific region or settlement in Kazakhstan that is suitable for қандас to move to? Or there is always a debate between whether қандас should move to rural areas or the city. What is the best one? What do you think? Yeah, Zhenya.
I think it depends on the ethnic migrants, him or herself, because, for example, from the government side, the annual quota is usually made for the rural areas. So one of the goals was to economically strengthen this and demographically strengthen these rural areas because of the demography loss. But I think there is no exact answer on whether it is better to move to rural areas or to urban areas. It depends on the ethnic migrants, him or herself. But usually what I see is that many of them want to move to bigger cities like Almaty, Astana, Shymkent, or Karaganda because of the opportunities to study, for the employment. And I think it is overall for all migrants in Kazakhstan. And as you know, also there is a program, the governmental program, not for ethnic migrants, but for the internal migrants, Kazakhstani migrants, which is called North-South. And the goal of this program is to make movements of people from the south to north because of the like imbalance in the demographic situation, because in the south regions of Kazakhstan, like the population is very huge, but in the north, like there is a quite loss of population. That's why our government like wants more people to move to the north areas. But in my opinion, like there is no best place. It depends on the goals of the people, and many choose like big cities. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Tokshan.
Yeah, I want to add to about the program of the government. They mostly, as I understood from my respondents, try to settle them in the North area, which is highly Russified. So some of the families of my participants had to move, for example, to the rural areas of Kostanay region, and but they don't speak, their family, for example, don't speak Russian at all. So they speak Kazakh, and they couldn't communicate with local people. And because of this, they search, like their community is very, very small. They search for the Mongolian Kazakhs also moving there. So they have their little communities. But for example, because a lot of Russian people, German, like ethnic German people live there, they, they're not in a kind of friendship relationships and so on. And I think this is also brings some disadvantages, some struggles in their adaptation.
Thank you, Tokshan and Zhenya, for your thoughts on the overall, that there is no actually one answer for these questions. Yeah, I think this applies to a lot of other questions related to ethnic immigration in Kazakhstan as well. Another question that was raised by our audience is concerning the second generation immigrants. So you have mentioned about the identity issues, the idea of homeland differences for the immigrants, or the discrimination, and also different forms of negativity they receive during their migration. And now, I know that you have conducted interviews actually with the immigrants themselves, but I want to ask about, what do you think, whether their children would still face the same problems, or it would be a very different form, or those problems would completely fade for them? Yes, Zhenya?
I think it mainly depends on the government's course on linguistic policies, because I think that second generation of migrants, ethnic migrants here, will not face such of economic or like economic integration problems, because they will be living here like for quite a lot of time. I think the main question is about the language. If like our society will, like in terms of 5, 10, 15 years, will totally like change the course to the Kazakh language, and will not abolish, but their usage of Russian language will diminish, I think they will not face such problems with integration and with the labeling and etc. But if not, there may be some problems with it. So I think it mainly depends on the language discourse here. Thank you.
Thank you, Zhenya. Yes, Ali?
Yeah, just building off of what she just said, yeah, I think a lot of it is language, and I think a lot of it is also probably the origin of their parents and what opportunities their parents have when they came to Kazakhstan as well. Because, for example, like I said earlier, for those migrants who I spoke to who came from Uzbekistan, I think their children would have a very easy time, growing up as a second generation migrant because of their parents, linguistic capabilities, ability to get a job in Kazakhstan, that sort of thing. And I think it'd probably be much different for somebody from a different kind of country, for example. One woman I spoke to who was from Mongolia, she was in her mid-20s, almost 30, and she had a child already. And she was really frustrated because she had a couple university degrees. She had studied in Turkey. She spoke a lot of different languages, but not Russian. And because of this, she wasn't able to get a job just because of a lack of Russian skills. That was it. And so I wonder, like, what opportunities her kid will have as a result of that, So I think it has a lot to do with the situation of the parents as well.
Thank you, Ali. Okay. Yes, Arujan, do you want to ask some questions?
Сәлеметсіздер ме? Thank you so much for this project and to today's speakers for today's event. I think it's a great place for all of us to engage and kind of discuss all of these big ideas. My name is Arujan. I'm doing my bachelor's at New York University, and my capstone work is also on Khandas youth and education as well. And something that I'm encountering in my own field work is that the scope of specifically youth perception is not just Kazakhstan and their country of origin. It's also just the global arena in a way. For instance, they don't see their knowledge of Mandarin as like something that is holding them back, but instead it's something like an employability asset, or their immigration experience is not just a challenge, but kind of an experience of living abroad, being global. And so I was wondering if you also encountered this in your own fieldwork, and in general, what do you think about this idea of like expanding the, I guess, scale of the discussion, especially for youth? And as Ellie, I think previously mentioned, globalization and all of those kind of buzzwords.
Yes, Turan.
I have an example of one of my respondents. She is also from China, and she knows Chinese, and she said that her future plan is to work for the Chinese company in Kazakhstan, and then move to the other parts of the world to travel. And I think here she clearly understands that this is a high advantage of her and for other Chinese Kazakhs who knows the language. It is also because of the countries they came from. Yeah, it's China. They have China is very high in terms of the economic opportunities, and a lot of people speak Chinese, but this is not a case with Uzbek language or Mongolian language, and I think here, yeah, if we will look through the perspective of the world languages and opportunities, Chinese Kazakhs are, of course, have more advantages, opportunities than others.
Yes, Ellie.
Yeah, thank you for your question. It's actually a really interesting point that you bring up, because I think in my research and in a lot of research, we kind of focus on Kazakhstan as kind of the end point. But what you bring up is a really good point. I think it depends a lot on these migrants' aspirations, you know what they want, like, because if their ultimate goal is to settle in Kazakhstan, to stay in Kazakhstan, then I think it's more important for them to feel that sense of integration. But then for some of these people I spoke to, they didn't have any plans to stay in Kazakhstan. They wanted to, study in Kazakhstan and then go on someplace else. And my first impression is to say that I think this kind of choice, I think I mentioned this in my presentation as well, I think there's a certain kind of privilege that goes along with it also, this element of choice and thinking about, you know, moving outside of Kazakhstan maybe. I don't know, it's not very, I don't have a very clearly defined idea on this, but it's something that I noticed because, you know, for example, one girl I spoke to, she told me that she doesn't have a homeland yet. She feels like she needs to go out and find it. But, you know, she's fluent in English, Russian, Kazakh, Uzbek. So she has a lot of mobility, a lot of abilities. She comes from a very like financially stable family. So I think she sees herself as having a lot more options, if that makes sense. So I think maybe privilege has kind of something to do with it as well, but it's just my thoughts.
Great to hear that. Actually, I would like to add something. Yeah, okay, I think we are having some more questions. Yes, Yanur, please.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank all the speakers for their amazing presentation and everything. So my question is that when I was talking to one of other researchers who is also studying on the topic of khandас, she noticed that speaking of integration, the men, they always like try to say that it's been easy for them to integrate into the society, or like they had little or zero difficulties moving to Kazakhstan. But while the female respondents was like, they could admit that there was difficulties. So I wanted to ask, like, did you notice this difference while you were doing your research or while you were doing your interviews? Yeah.
Thank you, Yamna, for the question. I think this is about the gender aspects of the khandас migration experience. Toljan, do you want to comment on this?
Yes. Thank you, Elnur, for your question. And this was really pointed in the experience of my participants from Uzbekistan. So usually, like those of my participants, they are like more than 30 years old, and they have families in Uzbekistan, their own families, and they married to the Kazakh men there, and their husbands decided to move to Kazakhstan because they had relatives in Kazakhstan and some more economic opportunities. So even they didn't want, like women didn't want to move, they had to move because of their traditional norms and rules in their families. And after moving to Kazakhstan, especially South Kazakhstan, yeah, because it's Uzbekistan, and for example, to Shymkent or Turkestan Oblast, they actually couldn't find work for a long time. They was also forbidden to work, and they also had to serve their mothers-in-law and fathers-in-law, and also some of them even experienced some domestic abuse. And I think, yeah, here clearly we can see that it's not equal. Women and men have different experiences. Yeah, khandastar, and this is also one of the very, very important topics to raise in research and in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Tolja, for sharing. Ali, Shania, do you have anything to say on this?
It's funny because out of all of the people that I spoke to, only 2 were men. And I didn't have any bias going into this. I didn't say I was only going to speak to women, but it just kind of ended up working out that way, that the people who wanted to speak with me were women. So maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not sure. Because I put out advertisements and stuff like that, but yeah, only 2 men. So I don't know if I exactly have an answer for you, but that was my experience also, something that I noticed.
For me also, this was the case. So I think that I had only like 4 respondents, like male respondents, and the other were female. And I noticed that like female respondents were more prone to discuss this issue, to share their opinion, their experience. But like in my research, I didn't find any like gender differences, maybe because my sample was not really representative, like, but I agree with Tugjan and with Eli that there should be these kind of questions, and maybe one researcher will research it and study sooner or later. So thank you.
That's good to hear. I think today we're reading a lot of questions that need to be further investigated into. I think for the sake of time, we would allow only the last question from Andrew. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrew. So I am a member of this project, and while doing this project, I learned a lot about Kandas, and I'm Kandas myself, so it's interesting to learn about so many researchers doing research about us. So my question is, what do you think? I mean, this question is already mentioned, but I will give an example and ask this question again. So the example is, I moved to Kazakhstan at 8 years old, which is quite young, but my sister moved to Kazakhstan, I think, at 16. So the difference is, I've always thought that learning Russian and you know, hanging out with local people means like integrating well, in my opinion. But after learning about other Kandas, and for example of my sister or other older people, they speak Kazakh and they're proud of it, and they don't choose to speak Russian in public places. But because we got discriminated a lot for speaking Kazakh, and so I sometimes choose to speak Russian. So my question is, so I got a little bit of, I think, identity crisis. So I wanted to know about this. What do you think about this, this case, my case?
Thank you. So here is age, attitude difference. Yeah, also another very highlighted questions is, what do you think is the best age to move to Kazakhstan? And also their daily life like experiences differences, even if they are from the same family, right? Yeah. Ali, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, your question's really interesting because a lot of the people I spoke to, they moved at really different ages. So some of them moved when they were 8 or 9, like you, and some of them moved when they were 18. And I think it's just, you know, the longer you live in a place, the more attachments you have to that place. So I think people who move when they're a bit older, you know, they're carrying more with them. They're carrying more like memories, more experiences from the place that they're from. And then I think integration looks a little bit different to them. Like for example, when you're a kid, I think if you move to a new place, you're automatically going to want to speak the language everybody's speaking, you know, you're going to want to fit in that way. And I think it comes a lot easier to young people. You know, it's easier to be a kid and to make mistakes and kind of find your way to fit in, you know. But I think when you're a bit older, it's more difficult, especially in terms of like language and that sort of thing. So yeah, I do think there's a difference in age between yeah, what integration looks like for those different ages. So yeah, it's really interesting point you brought up. Thank you.
Yes, Shania.
Thank you for your question, Andrew. I think it is really interesting case, and many of my respondents had like similar cases when they had relatives, for example, in family, like at home, they speak only Kazakh, but in society, my respondents could speak Russian also. And I think I agree with Ellie, and when you are younger, it is easier to integrate into society. opposed to when you're older, you have your like own attachment to your country of origin. That's why it is quite a bit like different experience. And what I noticed from my experience with my respondents is that younger generation, they prone to, they're easier with the Russian language. And that's why also they have this so-called identity crisis. Many of my respondents told me that I speak Russian I communicate in Russian with society, but when I come home, I only speak Kazakh, and I think that I'm different from others. What should I do? Like, I don't fit like with the locals, but I want to fit. And I think there is no like definite answer to this. It is a unique experience for many of ethnic migrants. And but I think it is an advantage to speak many languages and to know all of these languages. And I think that the migrants like should him or herself decide on when to use it and how to use it. So like there is no exact answer, like should you speak Kazakh or should you speak Russian? I think it is an advantage to know all of these languages and to use it. And I hope that this question will not be longer used and asked in 10 years from now. I hope that all of ethnic migrants will be satisfied with how they fit in, and the locals will be satisfied with all of this situation. So yes, I hope that the future will be different. Thank you.
Thank you, Zhenya.
Thank you for your answers. Yeah, so the reason I asked this question is because when older people speak Kazakh in most cases, and they talk about how they they love their culture and they don't want to speak Russian, but I choose to speak Russian sometimes, so I feel like I'm betraying my own culture. So now I feel better after all these answers. Thank you all.
Thank you for your feedback, Andrew. I think for the sake of time, we may call it a day. I have received some private messages from our participants, like they are coming late and that they want to have some briefing. I think we would try to arrange it on our Instagram, or the recording of this session will be shared on our YouTube channel that you could refer back to later. Yes, so again, I'd like to thank all of those who stayed with us until the end. I think there is 2 times or 3 times more people in the beginning, but now it's very few. But thank you for staying with us. And I'd like to give my huge thanks to our speakers, Toghjan, Eli, Zhenya, and Ishik, who actually left earlier, for agreeing to show your presentation and share your findings with us in public. I think sometimes we need to rely on the research outputs to deal with some of the challenges, even especially for the immigrants. Like sometimes it's not only you who are experiencing this problem alone. If you look into the literature, you would find like-minded people, and you would find more empowered probably because of this. So thank you very much for sharing this Saturday afternoon, or probably for some of you early in the morning, with us. And I look forward to seeing you again probably later in our other events. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody, and thank you IS Project for inviting us. It means a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us. And